We live in the age of distraction. Every second, we are bombarded by stimuli. Notifications, short videos, endless feeds, looping music, messages that never stop. Silence today is almost an anomaly, and boredom, an enemy to be eliminated at all costs. But what if boredom isn't the problem? What if it's just a symptom, a mask? What if what we call boredom is actually a well-disguised escape from what we fear the most, being alone with ourselves? This is the provocation made by Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist and survivor of Nazi concentration camps. In his works, Frankl goes beyond superficial explanations for human suffering. He suggests that the feeling of emptiness, so common in modern life, is an existential epidemic. What we lack is not stimulation, it is meaning. And the cruel irony is that the more we try to fill this void with distractions, the deeper it becomes. And here lies the most uncomfortable point. Perhaps even this video you're watching now is part of the problem. Perhaps it is also serving as yet another form of stimulation, an elegant intellectualized distraction, but still a distraction. Instead of facing the silence, you hit play. Instead of reflecting in the emptiness, you chose to consume content about the emptiness. Frankl would point out this irony with surgical precision. We are so used to fleeing from ourselves that even the process of self-discovery can become a trap. But then, what is left for us? Ignore the discomfort, pretend it doesn't exist, or accept that this unease is precisely the sign that something needs to be faced. Frankl believed that human beings only fully realize themselves when they find a greater meaning, and that this meaning can only emerge in direct confrontation with silence, suffering, and the absence of distraction. In the concentration camps, Frankl observed a brutal paradox. Those who found inner purpose were able to endure the unbearable. Meanwhile, those who lost that connection to meaning succumbed, even when their bodies still resisted. Modern life, with all its comfort, offers us another type of camp. Not one of barbed wire, but of constant dopamine. A gilded prison where freedom lies in hitting the next button. This video, therefore, is not just another piece of content to fill your time. It is an invitation to discomfort. And perhaps it can lead you to a reflection you have been avoiding for a long time. Because in the end, the boredom you feel may be your soul knocking at the door. And what you do with it, flee or listen, will define the course of your life. For Viktor Frankl, modern human suffering has a clear and silent origin. He called it existential vacuum. But what exactly does that mean? The existential vacuum is not just sadness, apathy, or lack of motivation. It is an internal state of deep disorientation, a persistent feeling that life has lost its axis. It is when everything seems to be working externally. Career, relationships, health, updated social media, and yet something inside you keeps murmuring. Does it all really matter? This vacuum does not appear suddenly. It is cultivated slowly by the collapse of values, the absence of meaningful rituals, the superficiality of relationships, and above all, the disconnection from a real purpose. Frankl believed that human beings cannot live just to avoid pain or seek pleasure. That is insufficient. They need a why. And here is the critical point. When this why is not found, it is replaced by anything that distracts from the absence of meaning. In the Unheard cry for meaning, Frankl describes how the frantic pursuit of pleasure, status, consumption, and entertainment is, in fact, a reflection of the pain of lacking a higher purpose. We live in a culture that glamorizes hedonism and trivializes silence, a society that offers 24-hour entertainment, yet where more and more people live in silent depression. The existential vacuum does not scream, it hides. In empty conversations, in compulsions, in excessive use of social media, in the irrational fear of being alone, in the urgency to always be doing something. Frankl said that unlike the classic neuroses described by Freud, caused by internal conflicts of a sexual or emotional nature, the existential vacuum gives rise to what he called noogenic neuroses, disturbances of the soul, caused by a crisis of meaning. These are symptoms that are difficult to diagnose because they do not manifest with clinical clarity, but with a chronic feeling that something is missing, even when everything seems to be in place. And the most dangerous thing is that instead of addressing the root of this crisis, we create artificial stimuli to suppress it. Boredom, then, is not a state of nothing happening. It is the echo of the soul when it tries to remind us that we live automatically, without direction. The problem is not that we are without stimulus. The problem is that we are saturated with them, and yet empty inside. Frankl saw this as a collective risk, a psychological epidemic, and his warning remains more relevant than ever. A society that loses touch with meaning becomes fragile, manipulable, sick, even if it seems normal. When meaning disappears, man clings to anything that fills that void. Addictions, extreme ideologies, rampant consumption, self-destructive behaviors, because it is better to feel something, anything, than to face the void. But what if all this that we call distraction is in fact a survival mechanism against the pain of not knowing who we are? And if, instead of seeking new stimuli, we should learn to endure silence, so that meaning can emerge from it? This is the provocation that leads us directly to the next part, the modern addiction to stimuli, and how each scroll may be distancing us from our own soul. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Imagine a rat in a cage with a button that releases doses of dopamine directly into its brain. The animal, hypnotized by pleasure, presses the button incessantly until exhaustion, even if it means neglecting to eat, drink, or sleep. Now, replace the rat with a human and the button with a screen, and you will have a brutally honest portrait of what is happening to the modern mind. The addiction to stimuli is not just a technological phenomenon, it is an existential symptom. Today's society does not merely offer distractions, it manufactures, markets, and imposes distractions as a lifestyle. And we, increasingly, have become compulsive consumers of cheap and immediate stimuli, trained to seek instant relief at the slightest sign of emotional discomfort. But what lies behind this compulsion? Why is it so difficult to spend 5 minutes in silence? Why is there an almost physical sense of anguish when we are without our phones nearby? The answer lies in something Viktor Frankl uniquely understood: the fear of confronting the inner void. Every stimulus we seek, whether a video, a notification, or background music, is often a desperate attempt to avoid an uncomfortable question: what am I doing with my life? Frankl wrote that man cannot bear the absence of meaning for long. When meaning disappears, the individual finds themselves facing a void that terrifies them more than any physical pain. And so, the mind creates escape routes. In the past, these routes were alcohol, excessive work, or sex. Today, they are automatic feed updates, 30-second short videos, and the illusion of constant productivity. The difference? It has never been easier to escape from oneself. The irony is that, while we believe we are entertaining ourselves or passing the time, we are merely numbing ourselves. We become dependent on continuous stimulation because we have unlearned how to be with ourselves. Silence has become unbearable, not because of boredom itself, but because it opens the doors to the unconscious, to forgotten memories, unresolved fears, existential dilemmas we avoid facing. Frankl called this noogenic neurosis, the neurosis that arises from the absence of meaning, and which cannot be cured with antidepressants or superficial behavioral therapy. It can only be overcome when the individual finds a purpose that transcends the ego itself. But this purpose cannot be accessed between one notification and another. It requires silence. It requires presence. It requires courage. With every touch on the screen, with every automatically chosen distraction, we are suffocating the only opportunity to listen to what truly matters. The soul does not scream, it whispers. And if we are always busy, we will never hear that whisper. The consequence? Chronic anxiety, disconnection, superficial relationships, and an entire generation that feels alive, but does not know why. And the most ironic thing is that the very idea of watching a video like this can be, for many, just another form of intellectualized escape. Consuming deep ideas without applying them, reflecting without acting, watching without truly stopping. And it is precisely here that Frankl offers us a disconcerting and disturbing comparison. Because for him, true inner freedom does not lie in seeking stimuli. It lies in resisting them. And this lesson did not come from a classroom, but from within absolute horror, the concentration camps. That is where we are headed now in the next part, where we explore how the total absence of stimulus forced human beings to confront their essence, and how some found amidst suffering the answer that we are all avoiding. Viktor Frankl did not develop his theory in a comfortable office, surrounded by books and security. He forged it in the depths of human suffering, in Nazi concentration camps, places where dignity, freedom, and even human identity itself were systematically crushed. It was precisely in this environment of complete deprivation that he witnessed a paradox that challenged all the psychological logic of the time. Some people, even in the face of absolute horror, found the strength to continue living, not out of hope for external rescue, but because they had discovered an internal meaning. In the camps, everything that composed the structure of modern life disappeared. There were no distractions, entertainment, social media, smartphones, or any form of stimulus that could numb the pain. Only the individual remained, exposed to raw and naked suffering. The mind, with no escape, was forced to look at itself. And what emerged from this confrontation was revealing. Those who could attribute meaning to suffering, no matter how small or subjective, demonstrated an almost supernatural resilience. Those who could not find meaning, even if physically strong, quickly withered. They died in spirit even before their bodies gave in. Frankl reported in Man's Search for Meaning that many prisoners died shortly after losing faith that something was still waiting for them. Just a single thought of surrender, nothing makes sense anymore, was enough for death to become inevitable. What kept Frankl alive was not the hope of liberation, but the purpose of rewriting the manuscript that had been taken from him, of continuing his work with logotherapy, of helping others find meaning even in pain. His body was imprisoned, but his soul remained free because he had a reason to endure the unbearable. And this is where the paradox reveals itself with all its strength. While many today live in freedom, surrounded by stimuli and comforts, they are more trapped than those men behind barbed wire, trapped by screens, distractions and addictions that numb the pain, but never heal. Frankl would see this clearly. The most dangerous prison is the one where the prisoner does not realize they are incarcerated. In the concentration camps, silence was imposed, and in silence, truth emerged. In the modern world, however, silence is avoided at all costs, and with that, we distance ourselves from the most essential truth, that the meaning of life will not be found outside, but rather within. But finding this meaning requires the courage to endure absence. The absence of noise, of external validation, of distractions, all that the prisoners were forced to face daily. And this comparison may seem extreme, even uncomfortable. But it is precisely this disconnection between suffering and meaning that makes the modern world so paralyzing. We suffer, but without understanding why. And since there is no explanation, we seek relief instead of understanding. Frankl saw this as a danger. A society that flees from suffering is not a healthy society. It is an infantilized society that trades depth for comfort. And that is why he said, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. This change, however, does not begin with a grand decision, but with a seemingly simple gesture, the willingness to sit in silence, even if just for a few minutes. Because it is in this space of absence that the true self can finally emerge. And now that we understand how the total lack of stimulus forced some to confront the essence of life, we need to look at the other side of the coin, the saturation of stimuli, as a way to anesthetize this very confrontation. This leads us to the next part, where we will explore the invisible cost of this addiction, the disconnection from our authentic purpose. There is something tragic and profoundly ironic about the way we live today. We have never had so much access to information, entertainment, connection, and tools to express ourselves. But at the same time, we have never been so disconnected from ourselves. Viktor Frankl saw this clearly decades ago when he wrote that modern man is in constant activity not because he is productive, but because he is terrified of being alone with his own thoughts. The consequence of this is brutal, yet subtle. The more we get used to seeking meaning outside of ourselves, the more we atrophy our ability to generate meaning within. The result is a kind of death that leaves no corpse but kills while alive, the death of internal meaning. Frankl said that the essence of human existence is the ability to attribute meaning to experiences, even and especially when they involve suffering. But this ability requires a type of internal silence that has become almost impossible today. The constant avalanche of external stimuli interrupts any attempt at introspection. The mind is always occupied with something, and that something is rarely itself. This is the most dangerous death, that of the spirit that has stopped seeking purpose, replacing depth with distraction. Every notification you receive, every video you consume without intention, every moment you automatically pick up your phone for no real reason, all of this may seem trivial. But it is like a small transfusion, one drop less of your inner autonomy, one more centimeter of distance from your existential axis. Frankl warns us that the real danger is not in suffering itself. It is in the absence of meaning in the face of suffering. A human being can endure loss, pain, crisis, anguish. What he cannot bear is the feeling that all of this is in vain. And if he does not find meaning, he seeks anesthesia. First, subtly, videos, games, social media, urgent tasks that lead nowhere. Then, if that fails, he turns to more corrosive forms of escape, compulsions, addictions, empty relationships, uncontrolled consumption. All of this in a desperate attempt to silence a question that insists on arising in the silence. Why do I keep living? The most devastating part is that this disconnection from meaning does not present itself as despair. It disguises itself as normalcy. Waking up tired, living on autopilot, spending hours on the phone, laughing at repeated jokes, commenting on trivialities, and going to bed with the feeling that the day was wasted. All of this seems part of life. But it is not. It is the absence of life disguised as routine. Frankl believed that meaning is not something you find by chance. It is something you build through conscious choices, even amidst suffering. But if you live immersed in distractions, when exactly do you intend to build that? With each new distraction, you drift a little further from the only voice that can guide you back, your own consciousness. It is at this point that the provocation intensifies. Are you still capable of being 30 minutes without any stimulation. Without your phone, without music, without social media, without conversation. Just you with your own thoughts. Because this simple exercise, which seems harmless, is actually a spiritual test. And for Frankl, it is precisely at this moment that real life begins. But before facing this silence, one must confront an uncomfortable truth. Perhaps you have turned your own growth into yet another distraction. And perhaps even this video is serving as a crutch, a way to seem reflective without actually changing anything. This reflection leads us to the next part, where Frankl confronts us with one of the most direct and transformative questions one can ask. When was the last time you were truly alone with your thoughts? If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. Viktor Frankl wrote that, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response, and in our response lies our growth and freedom. But what if that space has been invaded? What if you have lost the ability to inhabit it? What happens when there is no longer space between stimulus and response? Just an automatic reaction, conditioned by notifications, desires for approval, impulses of distraction. The answer is simple and devastating. You become a reflection, not a human being. A reactive organism, not a conscious individual. You exist, but you do not inhabit your own mind. Silence today is an unexplored territory, and at the same time sacred. It is there that real thought begins. It is there that consciousness emerges. It is there that meaning can finally be heard, if there is enough courage to sustain the absence of noise. But most people not only avoid silence, they fear it. Fear of what may arise. Fear of what they will hear. Frankl saw silence not as a punishment, but as a laboratory of the soul. A space where the human being is confronted with what is most authentic, and therefore most uncomfortable. The absence of distraction unmasks everything: insecurities, internal lies, inconsistencies, poorly healed wounds. And that is why it needs to be protected, cultivated, even if it hurts at first. But how to do this in a world that rewards distraction and punishes boredom? How to relearn to be with oneself, without stimuli, without instant dopamine, without the need to do something all the time? Here are some practices, simple in theory, but transformative in execution, for those who want to begin this return to inner silence. 1. Schedule emptiness. Yes, literally. Put a block of time in your calendar of 10 to 30 minutes a day called nothing, and take it seriously. No phone, no music, no reading. Just you, sitting or lying down with your own thoughts. It will be uncomfortable at first. That's exactly why it's necessary. 2. Aimless walks without headphones. Walk without a defined direction, without podcasts, without audio calls. Just listening to the sound of the street, the wind, your own footsteps. It is in this aimless walk that often the truest ideas arise. 3. Create a silence ritual upon waking. Before picking up your phone, before checking messages or emails, sit for 5 minutes and simply breathe. Observe what your mind is producing without external interference. This simple habit can redefine the quality of your entire day. 4. Write whatever comes. Unfiltered. Grab a notebook and write everything that is on your mind during these periods of silence. Fears, loose ideas, anger, desire, confusion. This is the portrait of your soul before it is silenced by the next wave of stimuli. Do not judge, just write. 5. Endure discomfort without fleeing. When the urge to check your phone just for a second hits, do not give in. Observe the urgency arise as a physical impulse, feel it fully, and choose not to react. It is there that you begin to rebuild the space between stimulus and response. These practices are not wellness exercises. They are acts of resistance. They are ways to declare daily that you refuse to be just another product of the attention economy, that you are willing to reclaim your depth, that you want to relearn to think, feel, exist, without needing something to entertain you all the time. And it is in this rediscovered silence that something begins to transform. At first, everything seems useless, uncomfortable, unsettling. But over time, you begin to notice something subtle, the return of a forgotten voice, yours. The part of you that does not want to be fed by more stimuli, but by purpose. The part that has been trying to speak to you all along, but could never do so because there were too many things happening. And it is precisely this part that Frankl believed to be the source of true inner freedom. But to hear it, you need to stop fleeing. You need to face the last and most important challenge, to accept that the emptiness you fear so much may be the place where your life finally begins. This is what we will explore now, in the final part. Why stopping to flee is the only possible path, and how the silence you so avoid may actually be the answer you have always sought. The greatest tragedy of modern life is not suffering, it is forgetting. We forget who we are. We forget why we started. We forget that there is a part of us that does not want applause, likes, or distractions, only truth. And that part has been speaking to you for a long time. But you silence it with headphones. You drown it in videos. You numb it with notifications. It does not scream. It does not force the door. It just waits. Patient, silent, in the space between your thoughts, in the discomfort of boredom, in the insomnia that insists on returning when everything is quiet. Viktor Frankl never asked anyone to find the meaning of life in books, gurus, or ready-made answers. On the contrary, he claimed that meaning cannot be given. It must be discovered, created, built in direct confrontation with reality, no matter how harsh and empty it may seem. And this construction can only begin when you stop running. The question is not whether you are fleeing. Most people are. The question is, until when? Until when will you avoid being alone with your thoughts? Until when will you fill every void with stimuli? Until when will you accept living a life full of movement, but empty of meaning? Frankl believed that every human being, even the most wounded, the most lost, the most confused, still has a sacred choice, to say yes to life. But this yes is not shouted on social media, nor celebrated with fireworks. It happens in silence when you finally stop. When you look within and decide, I will no longer run away. The emptiness you fear so much is not your enemy. It is the portal, the sacred space where the new can be born. And if you are brave enough to sit in the silence and listen to it, you will discover something that no video can give you. You are not broken. You are just disconnected from your essence. It is in this silence that your soul speaks, and it is speaking to you now. And that is why, in this specific video, I am not going to recommend that you watch the next video. Today, I want you to close this tab, to turn off your phone, to go to a quiet place, take a deep breath, and stay with everything you heard here. Do not run away from the discomfort. Explore it. And tomorrow, when you come back, I want you to tell me in the comments what happened, what you felt, what came to the surface, because perhaps for the first time in a long time, you have stopped distracting yourself and started to truly live.